통해 일어나는 해양의 대순환을 말합니다. 해양 컨베이어 벨트는 심층에서는 밀도를 결정하는 수온과 염분에 의해서, 표층에서 주로 바람에 의해서 작동되는데 해수와 해수에 녹아있는 물질의 혼합과 이동에 기여합니다. 해양 컨베이어 벨트의 작동 여부와 방향에 따라 지구의 기후에도 상당한 변화가 있었던 것으로 알려져 있습니다. 이 해양 컨베이어 벨트의 변화를 주시해야
네, 여러분 안녕.
Good morning, distinguished guests. Welcome to the 17th World Ocean Forum Marine Policy Session. My name is Chung Hae-ri. I have been given the honor of moderating this session. Thank you very much for coming at such an early hour. Once again, I'd like to extend my warmest welcome to all of you. This Marine Policy Session is the first ever session of this World Ocean Forum hosted by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. I have one housekeeping message. Simultaneous interpretation is provided into English and into Korean. Korean is channel 3 and English is channel 4.
Interpretation during the event. Tune your receiver into channel number 3 for Korean and 4 for English. 아울러 입구에
And please take the photo of the QR code to register yourself for the hours you take. Please make sure to take the photo of the QR code. And let us begin this session. Let me first introduce our speakers as well as the chair of the session. The moderator of the session is President Kim Gyu-hwan of the Korean Association of Ocean Science and Technology Societies. And we are joined by Mr. Kim Sung-bum from the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, the host of the session. And we are joined by Ms. Lee Yeon-kyung, Deputy President of the Korean Maritime Institute. And we are also joined by Dr. Seo Kyung-seok, Principal Researcher of the Korean Institute of Marine Science and Technology Promotion. And we are joined by Mr. Lee Ki-taek, Professor of Pohang University of Science and Technology, and who is also the President of the Korea Academy of Marine Science. And we are also joined by panelist Dr. Choi Sang-hee of KMI. And we are also joined by Mr. Bae Jae-ryu, who is the CEO of Ocean Platform. Last but not the least, Dr. and Professor Shin Kyung-hoon of Hanyang University is here with us. And before we begin, I'd like to turn to Mr. Kim Sung-bum of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries for his opening remarks. Please welcome him with a big hand.
예, 반갑습니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kim Sung-bum from the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. I sincerely welcome all the experts from whom I wrote present for the first session opening the 17th World Ocean Forum being held under the theme of Blue Taxonomy. I also want to thank Dr. Kim Gyu-hwan of the Marine Science and Technology Council for chairing this session amidst his busy schedule, as well as all the speakers, panelists, and distinguished guests on behalf of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the officials from the City of Busan and Busan Daily newspaper for organizing this meaningful event. Distinguished guests, the theme of this World Ocean Forum is Blue Taxonomy. It's a bit mouthful because that puts together all different words from different sectors: the blue of the ocean, the tech of technology, and the economy. I should have practiced more, but anyway, this word captures all different meanings. Each and every one of it is quite important. I would like to thank the organizing committee for such a wonderful event. As you know all too well, over the years, Korea's marine science and technology industry has experienced continuous growth. Leading institutions such as the Korean Institute of Ocean Science and Technology, the National Institute of Fisheries Science, the National Association of Oceanography Professors, and the Korean Society of Oceanography along with about 10,000 talented researchers, are at the forefront of marine technology development and industrialization. There are also various research organizations and educational entities being active in this field of oceans and fisheries. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the professors, the scholars, as well as the scholars and the practitioners in this field. And thanks to your hard work and effort, we have witnessed such a remarkable progress. And the government has not spared any support for the development through the R&D effort. In particular, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries is also promoting 5 major strategies for nurturing new industries in marine science and technology, such as marine bio, advanced ships, and smart aquaculture. We are focusing on the development of digital and eco-friendly technologies in the traditional marine industry and will secure new growth engines, including marine bio and blue food. And blue food is the name for advanced seafood or seafood incorporating advanced technology. And furthermore, we will expand startups, investment, and collaborative research between industry, academia, and research institutes, and put effort into training future experts.
기울이도록 하겠습니다.
I hope today's marine policy session offers passionate discussions on responses to climate change, enhancing international research cooperation, and strategies for fostering scientific and technological talent. I wish today's discussion act as a catalyst to turn the challenges and crises in front of the ocean through marine science and technology into a great set of opportunities. Once again, thank you for being here despite your busy schedules. My special thanks go to the speakers, moderator, as well as the panelists. And I wish you all the happiness and health. Thank you very much. Thank you.
김성범 해양
Thank you very much, Director General Kim, for opening the session. And now we will start the marine policy session with the moderator. We have President of the KAOS, Kim Kyu-han, who will moderate the marine policy session. Please welcome Mr. Kim with a big hand. Good morning. We will now begin the marine policy session with the topic marine policy, marine fishery science and technology. I am the president of KAOS, or Korean Association of Ocean Science and Technology Societies. Despite your very busy schedules, I would like to thank all speakers, panels for being here, and all participants from home and abroad. And those of you joining us online as well. Thank you for being with us. In this marine policy session, we will first hear from Mr. John Everett Nyberg, the Deputy National Hydrographer of NOAA, followed by Deputy President of KMI, Mr. Lee On-kyung, and Principal Reservoir of KIMS, Mr. Seo Kyung-seok, and Mr. Lee Ki-taek, President of Korean Academy of Marine Science, before we move on to panel discussion. So first, I'd like to invite Mr. John Everett Nyberg, Deputy National Hydrographer at NOAA.
Good morning. My name is John Nyberg, Technical Director for the International Hydrographic Organization. It's my pleasure to speak to you today, and I sincerely apologize for not being able to be there with you in person. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about our journey towards 2030 from a hydrographic perspective. There are many initiatives around the world that will have an impact on both technology and policy for collecting and sharing data in the ocean. I'll do my best to introduce many of these initiatives to you today. I'm not here to deliver a history lesson, but I guess I need to start someplace. certainly technology has had a large impact on policy throughout our history as hydrographers. Why not start with the Egyptians in 1450 BC and just a small snapshot of the journey that we have already been through? In your upper center, you can see an Egyptian tomb painting showing an officer with sounding pole. Next to it, casting the lead from an old ship. On the bottom, a wire drag diagram. The basic principle is to drag the wire attached to two vessels. The wire encounters obstruction, it will form a V. And on your right, an 808 fathometer, the NOAA, then Coast and Geodetic Survey manual of 1942, called this thing the first portable sonic sounding device. You can also see on the bottom left an 1883 snippet of a Key West, Florida nautical chart, and above it, the modern ENC. This is all really fun, but this presentation is not a history lesson, or really a discussion about technology or the evolution of policy, though I'm sure that you'll see all of these different techniques and products have a profound impact on both. For most of this presentation, I want to talk big picture environment, the opportunities that we have at our fingertips as hydrographers, how the rest of the geospatial world and people around the world view us as nautical cartographers and data scientists on the journey towards 2030. All of these may impact how we both do business and how it is reflected in our policy. It's an incredibly exciting time for hydrography. This cover from August of Time magazine announced that the ocean and its environment is the most important place on Earth. An increasingly rare bit of good news about the healing power of coral reefs if left alone. This was included in this issue. While the cover wasn't about hydrography, an announcement that the ocean is the most important place on Earth to a readership of about 500,000 people per edition, well, that has to be good for us. So just a snapshot of things happening now. You have this massive call to action in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This challenges us to aim for incredibly lofty goals to improve the world. There's a huge series of commitments that focus on the ocean in the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. There are initiatives that are really unprecedented examples of investment and collaboration in the ocean, including JEBCO's Seabed 2030 and the Data Center for Digital Bathymetry run by the IHO. There's an increasingly coordinated geospatial world being brought together through technology and big policy initiatives at the United Nations. This can be represented in the UN Operational Framework for Marine Geospatial Information Management. And, of course, advanced technology and modern standards underpin it all, and I'll talk a little bit about the S100 data model. So a few years ago, I was walking in the Singapore Botanic Garden, and the museum there had an exhibit, Change the Present, Save the Ocean. The thing I noticed first was a reference to all of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think you'll quickly see that hydrography and ocean science applies to the entire 2030 agenda. It's easy to see how our work applies to life under the sea and zero hunger, but consider clean energy, where we are calling for modern renewables like wind and marine currents. Consider Goal 10 to reduce inequality within and among countries, which calls for the need to immediate action to ensure safe migration. This migration often crosses our seas and waterways. From where I stand, we're a blue planet, and this is reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. The Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development is managed by UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and is a place where scientists and stakeholders can offer commitments to develop the scientific knowledge and the partnerships to deliver science-based solutions to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Ocean. I just wanted to point out here that there are a number of commitments that either depend on or are focused completely on hydrography to achieve the science we need for the ocean we want. But it's imperative to have national, regional, and global policy that support participation in initiatives like these. So please, if you haven't already done so, consider working with your National Hydrographic Office, institution, or team to let the IOC know what you're doing and to help on the journey to a sustainable ocean in 2030. I'd also recommend that you take a look at the long list of actions and then reach out to those that interest you. This is from the Decades website, where you can put together an activity, contribution, or action. Seabed 2030 is a collaborative project that aims to bring together all available bathymetric data to preserve the definitive map of the world ocean floor by 2030. The project is aligned with the UN goals to conserve and sustainably use the ocean and marine resources. Fishing, recreational, and commercial vessels worldwide are invited to submit data collected using standard navigation instruments. From a policy perspective, allowing bathymetric data to be collected through methods like crowdsourcing, then made available to Seabed 2030, is of major importance. Today, the initiative is bolstered by over 200 partners, data contributors, and supporters from across 50 countries. Each partnership brings it closer to the goal of enriching their mission with diverse knowledge, resources, data, and perspectives. The IHO Data Center for Digital Bathymetry, or DCDB, serves as a long-term archive for the JEBCO Ocean Mapping Program and Seabed 2030. This archive includes 30 terabytes of oceanic depth soundings, acquired with multi-beam and single-beam sonars by hydrographic, oceanographic, and industry vessels during surveys or while on passage. This also includes layers from many countries around the world. It would be very important and helpful to the project if you would consider policy from your institution or government to be able to contribute data to this project. This past August, the UN Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management's Marine Geospatial Information Working Group completed the two-part operational framework for Integrated Marine Geospatial Information Management, or UN-IGIF Hydro for short. IGIF is short for Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, which is the seminal work of the Committee of Experts. Part 1 of the IGIF Hydro is a strategic overview or executive summary, and Part 2 presents the strategic pathways. The UN adopted both parts as the complete UN IGIF Hydro. The expectation for the UN IGIF Hydro will be to serve as a reference, including guidance regarding policy for countries who wish to implement the UN IGIF's 9 strategic pathways in the marine domain, and to help, most importantly, ensure that marine programs are included in the larger geospatial information ecosystem. One substantial recommendation is for countries to consider a National Geospatial Council that considers national policy and is sure to include representatives from the marine domain. So now on to the crown jewel of the IHO work program, the S100 Universal Data Model, or as most of you probably know, S100. We're currently in a critical phase of development for S100 and are pushing to implement phase 1, or the route monitoring mode, product specifications by 2026, when we expect S100 electronic chart and display systems to enter service. Of course, we are also working on a whole host of additional product specifications at the same time, but we expect the phase 1 specifications to come online earlier than most to support the IMO acceptance of the S100 ECDIS in 2026. Here you can see the latest S100 product specification development timeline. We will be close on many of these phase 1 specification implementations, but are working hard to meet our targets. Phase 2 route planning will be soon to follow, as you can see in the bottom third of this chart. These are also important for both safe navigation and additional services. But I feel just as excited about what S100 will offer beyond navigation. This word cloud displays a good representation of additional data types that S100 will help standardize for use by mariners for sure, but also scientists, researchers, policymakers, coastal planners, and many more. Really, these standards will help us move towards a real digital twin of the ocean and will help us understand our ocean with authoritative data that can be brought together to support informed decision-making in the marine environment. I'll close with this slide on the IHO. If you haven't already done so, please visit the IHO website or follow us on LinkedIn. We're very much a technical organization that works on real-world problems to support safe navigation and protection of the ocean. Compared to many intergovernmental organizations, we're relatively small, but we get a lot done. Through coordination, we ensure uniformity in charting information, adopt and promote methods of collecting and sharing hydrographic data, and help to advance the field of hydrography and related technologies. If you haven't already, please join us in our work. With that, I conclude my presentation, and once again, thank you for inviting me to participate, and I wish you a successful conference.
네.
Thank you. Any activities related to the oceans and fisheries are based on the hydrography. Well, thank you very much for sharing the vision for the marine environment as well. Dr. John Nyberg, from 2010 through 2020, worked at NOAA and focusing on modernizing nautical chart and digitizing nautical charts and currently he is serving as the technical director of IHO. It would have been way better to have him in person, but due to the different time zone, he will share the video. I'd like to ask for your understanding.
And next, I'd like to invite our second speaker, Ms. Lee Young-kyung, Deputy President of KMI. Ms. KMI has a diverse background working as a researcher at the Seoul Institute and the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, as well as serving as a consultant at Entru Consulting of LJCN. She is currently the Deputy Head of Logistics and Maritime Industry Research Division at the KMI. She also serves on the Port Policy Review Committee of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries and the Logistics Policy Committee of the City of Busan. To speak about the topic of ship fuel transition and future changes in the maritime logistics industry, please welcome Ms. Lee Young-kyung with a big hand. Good morning. As introduced, I am Lee Eun-kyung. I would like to today speak about the ship fuel transition and expanding this to maritime logistics. This is the content of my presentation, the 4 topics. First of all, let's look at the IMO and the EU and the efforts to reduce GHG emissions. You can see there are a number of ways. And first of all, there's the EDI, the technical measures, and the operational measures such as SEAMP or CII. And there's also the economic midterm measure, such as levies. And as a long-term measure, how to expand zero carbon fuel. So here, what we need to pay attention to is CII, which is a strong measure. As you know, CII will be grading ships into A, B, C, D, E. And if you have 1 E or 3 Ds in a row, then you will not be able to operate your ship. At the EU, there are a number of measures, just 3 things, EU ETS and MRV. And Fit for 55. EU ETS will come into effect in 2024. And if you do not meet the standards, you will no longer be in the market. And MRV, you have to measure, report, and verify your carbon. And if not, for 2 consecutive times, then you will be kicked out of the market. And if you fail to present this once, you will be receiving a penalty. EU has another measure called Fit for 55, including all ships in all the maritime areas. 55% of GHG emission will be reduced. So not only shipping and maritime logistics, the EU is looking at how to reduce GHG emissions across the sector. As you are well aware, back in July, there was the MEPC 80th session where the GHG reduction target was set for 2030, 40, and 50. By 2050, as you can see, we are aiming for net zero. So basically no GHG emission at all. And by 2030, compared to a 2008 benchmark, 20% at least, at minimum, of carbon intensity will be reduced, and by 2040, 70%. As for fuels, of the total fuel used for shipping, at least 5% will be zero or near zero GHG emission fuel. And following this measure, there are many changes taking place. And again, as you know, there's the Green Shipping Corridor. As of June 2023, about 30 such corridor initiatives have been announced. Busan-Tacoma route is one such pilot project. And as for the preliminary feasibility study, the results will come out at COP28 in December. So we will continue to expand these efforts. And as you can see on this slide, for ships in operation, only 6% are run on LNG, eco-friendly fuels. But if you look at ships on order, more than 50% of the ships will be using not only LNG, but methanol or other eco-friendly fuels. So that just shows you the magnitude of how quickly we will be transitioning into eco-friendly fuel for ships. And on the right-hand side, you see the McKinsey data. Compared to 2030, by 2050, you see a much more colorful bar graph, which means a diversity of eco-friendly fuel sources, including methanol or ammonia. So these are some of the eco-friendly fuels that you will see come online, and not just nuclear power. Nuclear power is also one such power source that we are considering to adopt. And this is about how we look at GHG performance. We first look at well-to-tank and then tank-to-wake. Well-to-tank is just up to the bunkering level, but we have to expand that to also look at tank-to-wake or tank-to-propeller. This is where the fuel is actually consumed. So you need to look at the entire SOC to have the exact picture of the GHG performance. So we are now much more focusing on the well-to-wake perspective. And as you can see, there are orange and blue bar graphs. The smallest emission comes from the liquid hydrogen. So in terms of blue bar graphs, yes, the tank-to-propeller, you do see a lot of emissions, but overall, liquid hydrogen has the lowest emission. And so what it means to transition ship fuel is that the changes will not only involve ship, but in production of power and storage and shipping. So compared to the LNG, ammonia or liquid hydrogen should receive more attention because these two fuel sources, in terms of port facilities, lack the necessary facilities. In the case of ammonia, we can still tap into the LPG facilities by retrofitting LPG transport facilities for ammonia use, but for liquid hydrogen, we do not have the CCS technology or FGSS that needs to be used to inject liquid hydrogen to the engine. So there's a lot of areas for liquid hydrogen research. And starting from this slide, I wanted to talk about how the change of ship fuel involves much more than the ship itself, because we have to keep in mind the 7 different steps involved, including the carbon neutral fuel supply and demand, the monitoring during transport, and how much emissions will be expected. And then I'm going to go into details for each of the steps. First of all, how do we generate carbon neutral fuel and how much is the demand? So we need to predict the supply and demand. According to DNV, the level high, it says on the right-hand side, that's the level of carbon neutral fuel that can be produced. And then at the bottom, that is the demand that we see to come from shipping sector. So depending on the price and other impacting elements, we can expect the fluctuation in the prices and determine whether to place a new ship order or other predictions to make for us to order the right amount of eco-friendly fuel-based ships. And secondly, I did mention this briefly before, the engine and ship technologies are bound to change. In the past, ammonia or dual sources of fuel, double, triple engines had to be in place. And as I mentioned before, the nuclear power plants or eco-friendly electricity can be used for transport and shipping technologies that will have to happen. So these are some of the technologies for the ship engine and shipping technology that are bound to happen because of the dual sources of fuel. And the third step is the changes in the containers. As I said before about FGSS for the engine or CCS, CCS will change not only the transport containers, but also what goes on top of the trucks, like the cooling ISO tanks you see on the right-hand side for secondary battery electrolytes or milk. Cryogenic ISO tanks will be used for liquid hydrogen transportation. So this will require more research of how to develop these types of storage tanks. And then port facility changes. As I said before, ammonia or liquid hydrogen will require new port facilities that are not in place yet. Some of the methanol facilities are in place at ports, but when it comes to ammonia or liquid hydrogen, there is really no port facilities in place, and depending on who makes them well and how much, they can be the leader in this segment. Ports so far have focused on speed, but going forward, whether the ports are capable of providing eco-friendly fuels will make or break whether a ship will call to that port or not. So the way we look at the port productivity and the competitiveness should be expanded to include the considerations of these fuel facilities. And fifth, we need to also think about the changes in maritime transport routes from the changes in the fuels, because we will have to travel other routes. LNG and liquid hydrogen, as you can see in this table, boil-off rate is very high for liquid hydrogen, and they need to be stored at a very low temperature. So whether to go through the Suez Canal or to go through the North Sea route, as you can see, we actually did an analysis and found that during the summertime, about $3 million, and winter, about $5 million of benefit can come from taking the North Sea route versus the Suez Canal. Step 6 is how the fuel transition can easily explode. So as you can see here, off the Dutch coast, there was one such accident. 3,000 cars on the ship were being carried, and this ship went on fire. So we need to reroute the ships to avoid this route. And to find out the alternative routes, we can use the E2E stories. platform that we have newly built. So we came to make this platform with big data technology. We looked at the natural disasters or changes in the environment for risk monitoring. And secondly, for instance, if we just looked at the Busan and Rotterdam ports and put together all the different routes in order to avoid the high-risk routes. So here you can see the word risk. And if you can choose a low-risk route, then we can choose the safer shipping route and we can avoid the problem early on. So we do need a risk monitoring platform. And that's why we became to build this platform. And step 7, I was really rushing through my presentation to come to this slide. CII is very important. And if the GHG emission does not meet CII standards, then the shipping company will be kicked out of the market. So we have developed the digital twin technology, which you can see right here with the Sejong University, to see ships inland logistics and put together everything on the digital twin technology. We looked at, depending on the operation patterns and the fuels, and we were able to calculate the fuel consumption. And from CIA perspective, which ships will be kicked out of the market, or depending on low speed, medium speed, and high speed operations, what happens to the emission. So we are able to see transition into eco-friendly fuel, how much of CO2 emissions will come from the fuels, and we also need a monitoring system for all that. So just a simple transition in the fuel. Well, this involves much more changes than the changes in the ships. We need to look at the entire logistics ecosystem altogether. So starting from monitoring what kind of port facilities to install, and tracking and monitoring all of this. If you have a system in place for that, then you will be much more efficient. And that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. We heard about the ship fuel transition and future changes in the maritime logistics industry in a very easy, simple way. Thank you, Deputy President Lee Young-kyung.
Now I'd like to turn to our next presenter, Dr. Seok Young-seok, Principal Researcher of KIMS. His presentation is on international collaboration on seaweed biomass supply and industrialization. Dr. Seok Young-seok has been working at KIMS since 2006, working on marine biomass, and he also served as the Director General of R&D Policy Development and a head of startup industrialization, supporting the unit of KIMS. And please welcome him with a big hand. Very nice to meet you all. My name is Seok Young-seok. Today, I'd like to talk about the international collaboration on seaweed biomass supply and industrialization. Rather than talking about all the parts of the international collaboration R&D project, I'd like to highlight one project. What you can see on the screen is the seaweed. It's quite pretty, but under not so pleasant environment, it will not grow up as pretty as like this. So today I'd like to talk about seaweed biomass industrialization. Seaweed biomass supply, and for the supply, the sufficient and stable supply industrialization plays a key role. So this is the agenda I'd like to talk about today. First, let me start with the bioeconomy, and I'd like to briefly touch upon bioeconomy. In 2009, the OECD looked into the future, the advent of the bioeconomy by 2030. If you take a look at the stock market, you can see bio-related stocks are rising quite rapidly, and they will go up even further, and the scope will be expanded, and we believe that these bio-related factors will have a bigger impact. And another report of the OECD mentions that bioorganisms will play a key role. So if we can successfully develop bio-related tools, then that will generate many economic and financial profits. This diagram shows what bioindustry needs in order for the stable supply of biomass and the basic materials. The critical factor here, as you can see, is how much biomass you can secure with a standardized quality, and after the initial processing up until the final manufacturing, how can you secure the materials? So these two critical factors are of great importance, and many countries are putting so much effort into this, and Korea was not an exception. And as for the supply of biomass, you can do the seaweed farming or seaweed cultivation. And in order to secure the supply of materials, you can use synthesis or synthetic nurturing. And today I'd like to focus my presentation on the biomass supply. And as you know all too well, the biomass has long been considered to be land-based. But land-based biomass has some limitations. In the first phase, biomass is mostly starch-based, like corn and sugar cane. But they're extremely expensive because we consume, human species also consume them. That is why that is not suitable for the biomass development. And instead, the straws and other materials have been used in order to produce biomass, but they have lignin as one of the content. And in order to do the treatment, and lignin serves as a block to the enzyme activation. That is why we have to go through a very expensive process of lignin removal. And here you can see the distribution of the biomass materials, and as well as other fossil fuels, and petroleum is concentrated in the Middle East, and corns are concentrated in the Americas. In Asia, we have such high supply of seaweed, and Asian countries occupy the seaweed supply, and China accounts for more than half, followed by Indonesia. So this is the biomass which puts Asian countries at such a great advantage, and Korea is the third largest seaweed producer in the world. Of course, we account for only 5%, but anyway, we are the third largest producer. And out of the fisheries production, the seaweed accounts for 77% in terms of the value, but it accounts for 23% or so. For various reasons, well, there are great benefits we can find in the seaweed. The first is the abundance. The second is environmental friendly, and there has been deep studies on biomass. And seaweeds are mostly perennial plants. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything, or you don't have to take too many measures, but in order to keep it growing. And more than anything else, but it is environmental friendly, and this is there is a worldwide distribution. So we consume seaweed, but in other countries, well, we should not consume seaweed, but there is no competition to land food resources, and there is no need for purified water. Well, if you are to grow anything in the land, then you need to have some desalination process where you have to do the purification of water. But well, in this case, well, this is seaweed, and you don't have to do such a purification or desalination, and this serves as a great carbon sink. And there is such a stability, and we have a very stable supply chain of seaweed, and it is quite easy for us to incorporate this into the existing supply chain. And price competitiveness as compared to land-based biomass, well, this is way more affordable. Turning to the application of seaweed, there are various products like using kelp, liver, and sea mustard. In addition to that, there are various nutritional supplements, especially in Europe. Many people have started to eat and consume seaweed because they are really good for your health, and this is so-called halal food as well. Furthermore, seaweed can be used to create a vegan food, and even you can use it for plastic materials. And seaweed has phycocolloids, and the market size is as big as 150 trillion Korean won. This phycocolloids coming from seaweed can be used for ice cream, crab meat, for example, carrageenan, alginate, and so on. These all were found in the seaweed, although different in breeds. And this shows you the summary of the value chain. If you purchase 1 kilogram of seaweed, which costs you only $3, and if you extract an agar per kilogram, you can earn $15. And if you can extract alginate, which works for the pharmaceutical industry, then you can get $4,000 per kilogram. And this is the value of a seaweed. The common, ordinary seaweed can create such a value. And another aspect is the ecological value. It serves as a great carbon sink. When we talk about the ocean, it says that it accounts for 90% of photosynthesis of the entire universe, entire globe. And seaweed absorbs carbon dioxide and stores it in the deep sea, and this is another highlight of the value of the seaweed. And KIMS has been collaborating with Alpha E. Let me briefly touch upon the R&D aspect. So far, seaweed-related R&D has attracted some investment at the government level. Over the last 22 years, about $10 million has been invested, and mostly by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and in the past, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Forest. And all in all, the investment has been mainly made by the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and recently the government investment has been on the rise, especially in the 2000s. It has gone up quite significantly. And if you look at the seaweed R&D project as well as the ticket size of the R&D investment by industry, you can see there has been such growth in the investment in the 2000s, and in 2011 it went up quite significantly, attributable to the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Energy in order to develop some biomass materials out of the seaweed. But since then, it has been more or less the same. So the biggest portion comes from the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. The overall trend is upward. About 20% of the fisheries product is seaweed, mostly coming from Asia. The seaweed farming accounts for the lion's share, about 96%. Since 1970s, the seaweed farming overtook the wild collection. So these days, mostly it's seaweed farming. If you look at country by country distribution, Asian countries are leading the market. In the right bottom, it was mostly concentrated in Asian countries, but there are 52 seaweed growing countries. The number is ever growing. There are not many countries consuming seaweed. Why do we have such a growth? That is attributable to the North American countries as well as the European countries consuming seaweed not for diet, but to make some seaweed-related and seaweed-based products, because it can serve as raw materials for various products and for different categories. Let me take several examples. In Europe, there are several projects going on as well as in the US. And last year, as you can see on the right side of this slide, in the North Sea. And the first case of seaweed cultivation of deep sea in 12 kilometers away from the northern European Sea turned out to be quite a success. So large-scale seaweed production project is well underway in the U.S. as well. And U.S. DOE Alpha E. And Alpha E of DOE is like HIMSS of the United States. And they recently embarked on a project to grow seaweed at scale in order for the energy production and carbon sink. And let me give you a brief history of Alpha E. In 2000, the National Academies recommended Congress to establish an advanced research project agency within the U.S. DOE. And they have quite a similar background as to KIMSS, and their budget is as big as that of KIMSS. And part of their budget is allocated to the seaweed-related project. And last year, they paid a visit to KIMSS in order to carry out a collaborative project with us. Mariner program is a large-scale seaweed farming program. There are 5 different categories, starting from design and experimental deployment of cultivation and harvesting systems, all the way to research and development of breeding and genetic tools. So this all aims at the automation of the entire seaweed farming system, how to relocate the farms, and how to respond to and adapt to the changing environment. So it has such a technical benefits as well as mechanical benefits of the project, although the proposal was made for a 4-year project, and this will be updated through various interactions between the two organizations. So we will do the environmental survey and modeling, and we will also do experimental farm design, deployment, and testing, how to use the seaweed farming as a carbon sink. So 3 major projects are in this collaborative project program. As for Korea, when we do a project, we want to do more than just creating a seaweed farm. We want to go all the way to the bio industry and selling and commercializing the project under this big picture. Which portion should be done by what kind of ways? And in dark red is Alpha E project, and with Alpha E, these are the key areas of common interest, and through this, we want to achieve our ultimate goals all the way to the industrialization and commercialization of this idea. In order to sign an MOU with Alpha E, we compared the project between the two organizations, and we can see we can find a very good and strong common ground between the two organizations. And this is the concept of the life cycle management of seaweed bio industry, based on the hard work and research efforts put in by many scholars and professors. So you can develop various pharmaceutical products as well as the functional products. But if you have too much focus on that, then you might not be able to secure raw materials. You should have a stable supply of raw materials, and there has been such a growing demand for the stable supply of materials. So this is something put forth by a professor at Postdoc. And the idea is that you grow seaweed for industrial resource supply, then you can create a nearby biomass supply chain in the hinterland, and then you can grow the industry, and this will contribute significantly to the development of the local economy. And this is the picture we have in mind when we embark on this international collaboration project. So my presentation got inspirations from these researchers, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation highlighting the value of seaweed biomass, as well as the outlook for the collaboration project with the U.S. ARPA-E. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation.
Lastly, I would like to invite the final speaker, Mr. Lee Ki-taek, professor from the Korea Academy of Marine Science. He is also the president of KAMS, to talk about the topic of development of marine infrastructure industry to secure key marine manpower. Professor Lee is the first president of the KAMS, and in 2019 he was honored as a distinguished member of the American Geophysical Union, a very large institution. He is currently a professor of Pohang University of Science and Technology. Please welcome President Lee.
반갑습니다.
Good morning. My presentation, compared to those of Ms. Lee and Mr. So, I think is on the same page, and it's a great segue into my presentation. So in terms of science or industry, for us to develop good talents must come to the ocean science sector. Then what do we do to attract bright minds? I would like to spend the next 15 minutes to think of how we can do this. Since 2010, very rapidly, the Department of Medicine and all universities have become very popular, and that is a trend here to stay and get deeper and deeper, for a simple reason. Once you graduate from School of Medicine, economic compensation will be very huge. That's why students and their parents prefer to follow that path. I don't think that anyone can judge them, because this is the reality. So applying the same logic to ocean science and technology, for bright minds to come to this sector, we need to provide a very attractive industry and form a market. So that's the main message of my presentation. Looking around us, we see other people and we see different industries: ammonia, fertilizers, cements, steel, and plastics. All of these are easily found in our daily lives. In the 20th century, the human civilization really were determined by these four elements: ammonia fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers were made back in 2010 when the Haber-Bosch process was developed, with high temperature and 200 pascals of pressure, and at 400 to 500 degrees of temperature, if you mix hydrogen and nitrogen, you can get ammonia. And you use ammonia for a green revolution, and per unit, grain productivity was exponentially raised. There are about 8 billion people living on Earth, and this fertilizer was a key contributor to making that happen. And in the 60s, Korea underwent urbanization, and cement. Most of our buildings are made of cement. At 900 degrees, the limestone is burned to make cement. So a lot of heat is required to make cement. And in buildings, there are a lot of steel that is used. Since the steel age, about 2,000 years, we have been relying on steel. And in the future, this steel market is very promising. Steel is quite affordable. We don't know how much longer we will be relying on steel, but for a long period of time, definitely. And plastics. Since the 1950s, plastics have been in use massively. Most plastics come from petroleum. Some are biodegradable, but the amount of plastics biodegradable plastics used is quite small. All four of these materials require fossil fuels because nitrogen, to reach that high level of pressure and temperature, we need to burn fossil fuels to get to that. And same is for cement, plastics, because they all come from petroleum and fossil fuel based sources. So since the Industrial Revolution in 1850, based on these fossil fuels, the humanity developed our civilization. But then we came to a challenge because the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up, and global warming has become a very serious problem. So whether the environmental challenges are true and substantive or whether we are at a very abnormal level, we need to look to the past, what the environment was like compared to the environment today. So scientists in the past 40, 50 years have conducted a lot of research. If you look at the left-hand side, this is the temperature of the atmosphere over the past 800,000 years. We look at the data dating to the Industrial Revolution, the changes in the atmospheric temperature, the concentration of CO2, and the changes in the sea level. And all the record was observed through a direct observation. There are changes, but there's no clear pattern or direction. In the past 80 years, there's no evidence of a rise or fall in CO2 ppm. It just fluctuates in a very fixed band. And same is true for atmospheric temperature, about 12 to 26 degrees Celsius, and then the sea level remained consistent. CO2 concentration in the atmosphere remaining consistent means that the cycle of this fluctuation is because of the ice age and then the melting age. During the ice age, the CO2 ppm would fall from the 280 ppm during the warm ages. So here in this room, it's been about an hour into this meeting, and I think about 500 to 600 ppm of CO2 will be observed in this room right now. 500 ppm means if there are 100 air particles, about 400 to 500 of that would be CO2. It's a very small amount, but the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere determines the temperature of the atmosphere. So this consistency means that the planet has remained constant in terms of CO2 concentration and the temperature. On the right-hand side, to maintain this constant level of CO2, there are plants on land and then the ocean. So there is exchange between the CO2 in the atmosphere and with the CO2 on land and in the ocean. There is active exchange, but through the exchange, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere rises and falls. And there, in the past 800,000 years, no rise or fall in the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has happened. So meaning that the Earth has maintained very consistent levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And there's a very strong scientific evidence supporting this. Of course, CO2 levels do not remain constant, but it maintains a good balance. If we were to project a large amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then that will break the balance. And this is exactly what has happened since the Industrial Revolution. So since the Industrial Revolution, as you have seen many times before, the consistency has been breaking. On the left, on the right-hand side, you can see the consistent level of consistent rise in sea level. when the temperature rises, the water would expand and the volume of water will grow. 50 to 60% of that 50 to 60% of sea level rise is made because of the rise in the world, and the ocean temperature will also rise. Compared to pre-industrial levels, CO2 level has grown by about 50%. The CO2 concentration in the atmosphere right now, compared to the 800,000 years or a million years before, is unprecedentedly high. So please be mindful of this fact. So very simply, before the Industrial Revolution, for about 800,000 years, the Earth has maintained constant. However, since the Industrial Revolution up to the present and going forward, for a while, this constant will continue to be broken by all the industrial activities by humanity. That is where we are headed. And this is supported by a very clear scientific evidence. Then I would like to make a rather bold statement. The fossil fuel-based civilization should be abandoned. Of course, farewell in the human society would be quite simple, but bidding farewell to the fossil fuel-based civilization will not be so simple because all the plastics that we are using, the steel, cement, all of those materials are such a big part of our lives that it is not easy to bid goodbye to fossil fuels. Nevertheless, how should the ocean and science sector respond? As Dr. Seo has mentioned before, this comes from Vice President of Posttech and a professor of chemical engineering, Mr. Jung Gi-yeol. Around Korea, there is a large amount of biomass, in particular seaweed forests that are artificially cultivated. So there are large volumes of seaweeds around Korea, and we can tap into this by applying a chemical process to make something that can replace fossil fuels. We can create new materials and new fuel so that we can replace some part of the fossil fuel in our civilization, and then we can develop the ocean science sector. And secondly, ocean is a large source of CO2. The T here means trillions, so a total of 140 trillion tons of CO2 is stored in the ocean. Since the Industrial Revolution, for the past 250 years, human beings generated about 1.5 trillion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. If we were to capture all of that successfully and put them into the ocean, about less than 1% of the CO2 levels in the deep ocean will rise. So that is to say that the deep ocean is a very stable storage site for CO2. We can use the ocean to store CO2, and developing such technology is where the ocean community should endeavor, so that new industry based on the biomass and the 2050 carbon neutrality target for the world can be achieved. And so, in conclusion, we need to create this ocean-based industries that is very attractive to the general public, and in order to attract the brightest minds from other sectors into the ocean science sector to help address various ocean challenges and to create new industries. So we will have a great condition to make this all possible. So it was a short presentation, But with all of you, I think it was a good opportunity for us to think about how to attract good talents into ocean science and technology. And I am grateful for this opportunity, and thank you very much for listening.
네, 열정적인 발표 감사합니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. So we have gone through all 4 presentations, and now we will take a 5-minute break before we start the panel discussions at 11:15. We will prepare the stage for the next 5 minutes, and I will see you back here at 11:15.
안내 말씀드립니다. 잠시 후
May I have your attention, please? In 5 minutes, we will continue with the panel discussion. And before that, we have a housekeeping message about the QR code. And there is a barcode at the entrance. Well, you have to use the QR code for registering your class hours. Please make sure to use the QR code at the entrance, and we will soon continue with the panel discussion. Thank you.
네, 여러분 지금부터
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the panel discussion for the marine policy session of the 17th WOF. I'd like to invite all panel discussants and moderator to come up to the stage and take your seats.
Thank you. I am Kim Gyu-hwan, the moderator of this panel discussion. We have gone through 4 presentations highlighting very important points. I really appreciate our 4 presenters. I was deeply inspired by the presentations, although these presentations are cover different areas and they are all on the same page. And now we would like to have a panel discussion with 3 new panelists joining us. And we will have a Q&A session if time allows as well. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A session toward the end of this panel discussion. We will open the floor for the questions. Let me introduce our panelists for this panel discussion. We are joined by Mr. Choi Sang-hee, Vice President of KMI. Dr. Choi is serving as the Vice President of Korea Maritime Institute, and he is covering development and operation of the supply chain, the port, and the logistics policy. And he is also in charge of the Vice President of the Research Development at KMI. And he is an expert member of the National Science and Technology Advisory Committee, a member of National Logistics Policy Committee. And we are also joined by Mr. Bae Jae-ryu of Ocean Platform. Mr. Bae worked for Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering for 35 years, where he performed basic ship design work, technology strategy, and technology management work. Recently, he has been developing technology to convert the small ships into eco-friendly ships. Last but not least, we are joined by Dr. Shin Kyung-hoon of Hanyang University. He has been working and teaching at Hanyang University since 2003 and has been carried out the education and research with the focus on the marine ecological and environmental diagnosis. Now he is a full professor and a director at the Institute of Ocean and Atmospheric Science of Hanyang University. He actively published many papers as well. Thank you very much for joining us today. Following the order of the introduction, I'd like to turn to Dr. Choi first.
감사합니다.
Thank you, moderator. So I'd like to thank all 4 presenters, and I wanted to discuss 3 topics of what was presented. First of all, information about ocean science.
회장님께서
The presentation delivered by Dr. John Nyberg, the use of oceanography, and the second
topic is about eco-friendly ships, and finally with Mr. Iki-taek, topic of ocean industry. So those are the 3 topics I'd like to touch upon.
The importance of information cannot be overemphasized. Hydrographic information and oceanographic information and various object-related information will come at such an important crossroad, which will determine the future of our science and technology. And as I serve the National Committee, if you take a look at the various challenges in the oceans and maritime industry, you can see that there has been such an extensive R&D effort over the last 2 to 3, or especially for 3 to 4 years. There have been many projects going on. Now, with the rapid advances in smart technology, maritime information generation and production project and utilization of such information in various areas, there have been such an extensive R&D effort, but the thing is that they are not really focused and concentrated, rather than that they have been scattered here and there.
그리고
The autonomous ship and then smart buoy and waterways and port management and port operation. In these aspects, the integrated generation and production of information and data and the shared use of such information is of greatest importance in order to enhance the probability of success in the R&D project. However, the integrated use and shared use and generation of information has been faced with various limitations. Down the road, in order to enhance the maritime R&D efficiency and in order to secure sufficient budget, it would be quite important to ensure the joint production of information and data as well as the shared use of data through a dedicated body. In order to do that, we need to ensure the openness of the information and its dissemination of information as well. All at the same time, we also have to make sure the efficient use as well as the security of the information, and this will make a significant contribution to the promotion of the marine economy.
Secondly, I'd like to take a look at the ocean's logistics. The key buzzword nowadays is when will we complete the transition to an eco-friendly fuel? Transition to eco-friendly fuel and the expanded ship order accordingly will be the big agenda and obligation for the Korean shipping industry. As you have heard in the presentation, changes in the ships and ship orders from LNG to methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen and electricity will be happening in the future. I think the order is almost determined, but most importantly, the order of that transition of fuel, I think, will depend on which fuel is most productive, most efficient, and most affordable in supply. In addition, from production, storage, shipping, bunkering, depending on who takes leadership, the whole market will be dominated by that player. So among different companies and nations in the fight to get that leadership in the ship logistics and shipping, ship engine, storage, container will be the first to transition. There are many different modes of this, but whose technology will be most widely used in bunkering, loading and unloading has to happen at the same time, including IT. What is the most cost-effective technology and the most eco-friendly activity of this whole process to attract the very large ships? These technologies, to port these technologies must first develop as a prerequisite. For eco-friendly fuels, compared to bunker C, it has 5 to 6 times more expensive prices, according to the predictions. So for Korean shipping companies, transitioning to an eco-friendly ship is a very urgent matter for us to make our ports competitive and to lead the eco-friendly fuel market and to transition to the ports to these ships requires of full aspects of government policy support. And moving on to the final topic about ocean industries. If we look at the entire oceans and fisheries industries, this involves shipbuilding, platform building, materials development, leisure, tourism, basically 9 different sectors. For today, our oceans industry is shadowed by other industries. There is no star industry in shipbuilding, for example. So oceans and fisheries related industries are mainly SMEs and startups. And in the future, oceans industry, the level of interest is quite low. Going forward, if Korea is to become an oceans power, ocean companies need to invest in the sustainable future, and we need to find a industry that can be familiarized with the public. We need to make bold investments in technology to find the next star item for the oceans technology, and young talents need to be provided with full support. Thank you. That'll be all.
네, 최상희 부원장.
Thank you, Dr. Che, for such an invaluable comment. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Bae Jae-ryu of Ocean Platform. Thank you. Very nice to meet you all. I am leading Ocean Platform. I'm also in teaching at Korea Maritime University. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm so emotional today because I was born and raised in Kadokdo, and I'm currently based in Kadokdo as well. And October 25th, tomorrow, there is one dedicated session to Kadokdo Island, my hometown, and where I'm currently based. And I really appreciate this special session. As you know, Kadok New Port will come into operation by 2030. And I believe Korea, the Busan, will be the host city of World Expo 2030. I think things have turned into our favor. I really appreciate the presentations, especially Dr. Lee of KMI highlighted that there is such a great change when it comes to the ship fuel. Ship builders and ship parts manufacturers are focused so much on fuel and the options for the ship fuels, because the variety of ship fuel means there should be a variety of ship parts and components. And with that, we would be able to build eco-friendly vessels regardless of the size, and this will put us ahead of other nations. So, according to the mass of the ship fuel, each has different characteristics, and the erosion properties would all vary as well, from the pump all the way to the compressor valve and pipes. All these parts and components should be developed from new. That is why the maritime industry is focusing so much on technological development, and this would require a massive investment as well. So I'd like to ask for your support in this regard. And the third presenter, the industrialization of the seaweed farm, with the opening of the Kadok New International Airport, and the airport will serve as the hub of logistics. But if we are to use the international airport, then you'd have to waste on the road at least 2 days on the way to the airport, on the way back to home. But with the opening of the Kadok International Airport, we will be able to save some time, a significant time. And if we start our investment on this various front from now on, then we will be able to generate huge benefits for the entire society. So I believe this deserves and behooves us to make a strategic investment. We need to have a mid to long-term perspective in this regard. And the last presenter, he mentioned the CO2 emission and how to do the CCS. and there is such a vast amount of carbon dioxide in the air, how we can capture and store the carbon. Well, in this regard, the size of the market is rather small in size, but when it comes to the maritime industry, but onshore CCS, many companies are bracing themselves. SKENS, Hyundai Engineering Construction, and POSCO. All those countries, all those companies are working heavily on and investing heavily in this land-based CCS. But in order to use this on board, well, we need to develop new technology and new systems because, well, there's new rolling pitch, heaving, and all different behaviors ships would show. And the contamination and the seawater caused and triggered erosion and the limitation and the limited space, but these factors should be taken into consideration in developing technology for the maritime vessels. And this would require further collaboration. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. And next, Professor Shin Kyung-hoon, you have the floor. Good morning. I am Shin Kyung-hoon from Hanyang University. I want to focus. I have a scholar studying the earth and marine science and the biologies of ocean. And after listening to the 4 presentations and the previous panels, I wanted to touch upon how the international community in this 21st century has realized that for continued prosperity, we need to address the most urgent challenge of climate change. And directly related to this, energy issues. The energy challenges would require a transition in energy sources. So far, we have been relying on petroleum, fossil fuels for science and technology development and the civilization advancement. But as a side effect, climate change has emerged, will get worse, and possibly threaten the existence of humanity. To address this challenge, what the consensus is that at least we must become carbon neutral very quickly. If possible, we need to maintain the CO2 emissions at the level of 2000, but by 2030, 2050, we do need to never exceed the level of that CO2 emission. If not, we will go through the tipping point, according to climatologists. So we've heard the 4 presentations today. And the 4 presentations covered a wide range of topics, but basically they all relate to carbon emissions and transitioning away from petroleum. The first presenter, well, the second presenter was Deputy President Lee Eun-kyung. You mentioned the ship transition rate, and of course, this relates deeply with CO2 emissions, to reduce CO2 emissions. So shipbuilding is one of the backbone industries in Korea. And at this crossroads, we should take the lead in making that transition for sustainable development of our shipbuilding industry by creating new demand and meeting the new demand. And I think Dr. Lee presented some good ideas and proposals about the transition of fuel, the container transitions, and port facility transitions as well. So I think all those elements are interconnected. And the third presenter was Dr. Seo, who mentioned the marine biology and the energy that can come from that. And in particular, he focused on the microalgae and the seaweeds. And as we heard from the presentation, this relates to blue food and carbon sinks, using the vital resources in the ocean as blue carbon. In particular, seaweeds can serve as a food, but also be used in producing many value-added products. R&D in this sector has been led by Korea, and the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries have been investing very boldly in this R&D, and recently the Korea-US Joint International Research will elevate the outcomes of such R&D. And I am very interested in this sector, and I have been following the research outcomes very keenly. And as we heard from the presentation, mass production is really the key factor here. We can find very many different useful materials and develop technology to refine them, but in the end, if we do not have enough ingredients, then we cannot meet the demand. So that can be a limiting factor to the industry, the mass production of seaweeds. We need to build a system that will enable mass production, and this is where concentrated investment will be required, as well as R&D efforts. And last but not least, President Lee Gi-taek gave us a presentation about how the human civilization has been relying on ammonia, cement, steel, and plastics as key materials. The relations between CO2 and climate change was very clearly demonstrated with strong and clear evidence. And regarding carbon neutrality, in Korea, the industries have been heavily using petroleum, although Korea does not produce petroleum, using refining technologies, chemical processes. We have used petroleum to turn them into plastics, cement, and steel. And those types of industries, well, are not really in fitting with our transition towards an eco-friendly industry. And in that transition, we can use the ocean. And we need to consider a number of different ways to do this. And with that, we also need to consider oceans and technology. And also, oceans are a big source of blue carbon and carbon sink. So you presented new ideas of how we can tap into the ocean in this manner, and I am very keenly interested in that possibility. And going forward, scholars, researchers in ocean science and engineering need to work together. This is a fairly new sector globally, so if we can make some bold investments, then I think we can really become a leader. Thank you.
네.
Thank you very much. Panel discussion usually takes a lot of time, but today's panelists have been very efficient in time management. I really appreciate that we have sufficient time to address questions from the floor. Now, I'd like to ask some questions to our presenters. First,
Dr. Lee Yeon-kyung. by 2030 and 2050, IMO has put forward a very strong future strategy. What do you think? For 2030 and 2050, you shared with us what the plan is. And what's also important is for port cities like Busan, the excellence of ports, particularly here in Busan, the port is one of the best in the world. For carbon neutrality in ports, without a good strategy, then the Busan may go down the rankings of ports. So what do you think? In terms of carbon emission reduction, how far along is Busan? The Busan port. Well, as a national strategy, from shipping to ports, carbon neutrality strategy is being set up. Fuel development is also ongoing accordingly. So compared to other countries, I don't think that Korea is lagging behind. But as I mentioned in my presentation, if you look at different sectors one by one, we seem to be doing okay. But the fact that the fuel is transitioning is a trend and a flow. Without a supporting structure of an overall flow, we will never be enough. In terms of bunkering, energy bunkering, and hydrogen research is happening. But what type of bunkering would be optimal? And looking at the ship movements, which country will be the main supplier, and what are some of the ships that never get called to port to Busan, but what more can we attract to Busan ports in terms of services? This is where we are lacking. And I think other countries are looking into these matters as well. So if we can place more research efforts here, I think we will be able to maintain our current status. And eco-friendliness at the IMO, Korea is one of the leaders for this movement, and if we can do this successfully, our status as a world port can go up. So I have trust in our technological prowess. Yes, at the IMO, there are a number of questions they're pondering on, and because of ship fuel, CO2 emissions, more than 2% of CO2 emissions is accounted for by shipping, which is almost equivalent to the entire emissions from Germany. So if nothing is done by 2050, the CO2 emissions from India could be coming from shipping. So we need to do something right now. And the IMO continues to say that vessel fuels can be transitioned to eco-friendly fuels, and what's most important here is to make eco-friendly ships. We have a representative from HD Hyundai. The CEO himself is here today. What's the shipbuilding status of Korea right now in terms of eco-friendliness? Well, that's not an area of my expertise, but to answer that question to the best of my ability, I felt that, and as he has mentioned, the CEO of HD Engineering has mentioned, the fact that fuel is transitioning means that the ships will become more and more expensive, and it will require more and more investment to make these ships. And can we make profit out of that? Making one ship, and that ship will be in operation for 30, 40 years, and what to do with the existing ships? How do we make all this to our benefit, and what is the fuel to choose? Well, these are very tough questions. I'm not sure about what happens with the shipbuilding process, but we do need to work together to make this industry economically viable, from operation to manufacturing to the end use. We need to think about the strategic step to take for shipbuilding. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Seo of KIMST. I would like to know the biomass, the seaweed biomass, can capture a huge amount of carbon. And I truly see how important the research as to that is. The seaweed biomass industry in Korea, would you please share with us the status of that industry in Korea? Although I'm not working in the field, I'm in the research area, but to my understanding, in Korea, the mass production of seaweed is not even enough to cover the consumption at the current level. The seaweed farm, the kelp produced, mostly used for the abalone aquaculture. So liver and seaweed, we consume it, or other aquaculture farms use them and consume them. It's not more than that, but in order to produce high-value items and products, based on my understanding, up to 70% we have to import from European countries because, well, they don't consume seaweed, they produce domestically. I was so shocked to see that we are highly reliant on the imported seaweed. I think that's a very serious problem we have to tackle, and we have such an advanced aquaculture technique and technology, and that is the reason why ARPA-E proposed us to have this collaborative project. We are not making the most of our advantages, so if possible, I believe if we can expand the seaweed farms, not to eat into the livelihood of the seaweed farms, we should be able to grow seaweed for the production of commercial products. Thank you. National Industrial Complex project and plans have been announced, but the natural biomass industrial complex was part of the plan. But businesses need to be interested in this area. But the businesses, I'd like to know whether they are interested in the seaweed biomass as well. There are many startups coming up, but those companies are interested in the well-cultivated microalgae, the seaweed. Seaweed farms need to be in large scale, so there are not many startups which are into the seaweed farming industry. So existing seaweed farms or aquaculture farms are only interested in this new project. That is why the foundation should be built and created by the country.
Thank you. I would now like to invite President Lee Gi-taek to take the floor. Personally, I do think that the ocean is a vast area involving engineering and many different areas of specialty such as offshore plants, shipping, logistics, and ports. All these ocean sectors, I do believe, is lagging behind advanced technology such as semiconductors and even aerospace. But I think ocean is an important carbon sink, and this is where very important advanced technology can be developed. So because of this general perception that oceans is not about advanced technology, attracting talent is challenging. So in your view, I do know that the government commitment will be important and the university efforts will be important. What are efforts that we need in different players and stakeholders? Yes, that's a very difficult question. First of all, at the national level, as I mentioned at the beginning, no matter what national strategy is adopted, students will choose their area of expertise and a career path where they see a viable future. So no matter how the government may support, the oceans and technology. Without a promising future, oceans and technology will never attract good talent. So first of all, the government should think about growing the ocean-based industry in a different way than before. We need to develop the ocean industry through policy support so that a star company can be made, and we need a long-term research. And at graduate schools, to cultivate and foster good talents, we need to first produce good scientists and scholars and professors. And graduate schools need to be more revitalized. And I think this is like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? In the ocean science sector, openness must become number one. So first of all, when many people come to the ocean science sector, when graduate school students and professors are selected, and when researchers are selected for government-funded research institutes, we need to be very open-minded about non-ocean specialists. Because when they come, we can open up a new opportunity in the ocean science sector. And only when that happens, we can attract new talent. For example, if the ocean segment is not open enough, then I don't think we can develop this sector. Because primarily the academic arena and the research arena, when they select the principal researchers, they need to be very open-minded. And at the national level, they need to provide, at minimum, policy support to enable an industry to grow out of this sector. And when that happens, I think we can really have a promising future. Thank you. That was a very insightful point. Openness is very important. I agree, and you were right to the point. So now that we have heard from all three speakers, and I have asked all of my questions to the speakers, I would like to ask our three panels to just give us concluding remarks very shortly, starting with Vice President Choi, to conclude this marine policy session.
I've already shared my comments on three different aspects and three different presentations. The marine technology and science. From that perspective, the ocean is not that high in the minds of the people. The semiconductor, the battery industry, and other shipbuilding industry, well, those industries are the first thing that comes to mind to the Korean people. So the maritime industry and the oceans and fisheries to have a strong position in the national economy and to attract sufficient investment, I believe we need to raise the public awareness as to this. But one person's effort is not enough at all. From the government all the way to the businesses as well as the research organizations need to fully dedicate themselves to this end. And I believe, like the Federation of Business Leaders, we need to have an association of maritime leaders. Now I'd like to turn to Mr. Bae, and Jeju Island is very popular these days. And there is such a large-scale project going on. There are various emerging industries and subsectors within the maritime industry, especially the machineries manufacturing for the shipbuilding industry, like smart machineries and parts and equipment, and autonomous navigation system and equipment. These are the very promising subsectors, but shipbuilding industry is not enough to cover all different areas and all such a variety of new technologies. That's why I believe this should be perceived as a nationwide project. when it comes to shipbuilding, well, we have achieved such a great success. We have 3 largest shipbuilders in the world in Korea. The ship parts and components, we need to grow and nurture and raise new businesses and strong businesses because we are highly reliant on the European countries and Northern European countries. And this requires collaboration and cooperation between the university and the businesses to nurture new talents. Thank you.
우리 신경훈 교수님은
Professor Shin, since you are also leading the Institute of Earth and Marine Science, any further comments? Well, yes. Atmospheric and hydrospheric science is an area that I am engaged in, but compared to other sectors, I think oceans science has been lacking. But in terms of shipbuilding, Korea is internationally very competitive. And as mentioned before, ocean science, based on ocean science, industries need to be developed and starting now. And for this to happen, yes, openness was mentioned before, and I am within a university, and the general trend of university is to allow for students to choose their own major. About more than 30% of students will be able to freely choose their major. But the concern is that because AI, software, secondary batteries, semiconductors have been so popular, most students may just flock to those areas, because then the nation will not have a balanced number of students across different fields. But of course, the students need to be respected of their autonomy in their learning and their specialty areas. So in different academic fields, each field has to become competitive on their own and be able to attract students. And as Mr. Lee has mentioned before, we need to be open and we need to be able to attract people of different specialties and expertise, because different areas can connect very well to ocean science. And through education and research that is open to other sectors, I think ocean science can develop further. And when that happens, I think we can become more competitive in this field. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to conclude the marine policy session, which has been most enthusiastic of all of the policy sessions that we've had. I'd like to thank 4 presenters and 3 panels. And this is the end of the panel discussion of the marine policy session. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. I'd like to please give another big hand to the moderator and all the speakers. So we will have a photo session. Please remain on stage for the photo. The Director General Kim Sung-bum will come up to the stage for the photo session as well. Oh, he has left us. So the moderator and the speakers and panels will have a photo session. Thank you for the passionate presentations and discussions.
어디 중간 조금 자리 이동하실까요? 괜찮습니까? 네, 그럼 곧바로 진행하겠습니다. 죄송하네요. 뒤에 테이블을 치우고 있습니다. 자, 지금 진행하겠습니다. 하나, 둘, 셋. 멋지게 첫 번째 세션을 이끌어 주셔서 진심으로 감사드립니다. 여러분 박수를 보내드릴까요?
Please give our speakers a big hand for the wonderful marine policy session. Thank you so much, and that's the end of the photo session as well as the marine policy session. Thank you for making this a wonderful session. And this is the end of the Marine Policy session, the very first session of the 17th World Ocean Forum 2023. From 3:30 this afternoon, we will have the opening ceremony. So I'd like to ask your interest and participation at the opening session. Thank you. I will see you at the opening ceremony.